Hello, everybody, and welcome to the show. We are very happy to have you here today. Of course, this is TFT or Tinfoil Talk, and we are going to be taking a look at some very interesting conspiracy theories today. We're going to be looking at religious conspiracy theories, and of course, we'll get to that in a moment. I want to come over and say hello to George. How you doing, George?
Hello, Chester. How are
Hey,
you?
I'm doing great, man. I'm very good. And I see we got a couple people in here. We got Roger Heller. We got Huge Ass. Nice to see you, Huge Ass. But happy to have you guys here. Now, of course, keep in mind we do have all our line links down below. We do appreciate you guys checking those out, particularly the one on FanSpeak on Facebook, because Facebook, our Facebook group is growing and growing and growing. I understand all the nonsense that's going on with Facebook and Zuckerberg and such, but our little community is fun and happy, and the good thing about our Facebook group, unlike a lot of them, is you're free to post whatever you want. Right? We want you to just talk about what's going on in our community. A lot of people talk about movies and comic books and role playing games, board games, card games, video games, all kind of stuff. And that's cool. That's what we're here. We are fan speak. We want the fans to speak. And we're having a lot of fun with the community, and a lot of people are getting involved. So why don't you come be involved too? We'd be happy to have you over there. Also, keep in mind, hitting that subscribe button and like button is most absolutely appreciated because it helps us to grow. But the thing that helps us most, being live streamers, is what we are, is to hit that share button and let your family and friends and extended community know what's going on so they can come over here and join us. But, George, we're talking about religious conspiracies. Ooh, sensitive, dude. Sensitive topic. Um,
Nah, not really. It's only sensitive to the people who take it too seriously.
this is true. You should never take anything too seriously. It's kind of like the word tolerance and acceptance. Tolerance is being able to tolerate something that's not causing harm. Right? It doesn't mean you have to like it. It just means you allow it to exist because there's no reason for you not to. Where acceptance means to take it into your heart and make it part of your life. And of course, that's the difference between what we're talking about. We can sit and talk about anything because we're just having a conversation about it. And some people go way too far with stuff. But like for instance, when we talk about that getting that coffee from the barista that has the wonderful Jesus Christ's face sitting in your coffee, giving you that inspiration for the day, or the lady who sits in her at a breakfast table, having seeing Jesus in her toast and making it become national news. These kind of things happen all the time, and of course, it's easy to mock religion. And I don't think that's a good idea. I don't think that's smart. There are crazy things that happen in every walk of life, for sure. But in general, I think religion, although it can be harmful, has been harmful. It can also be very good and useful. It can bring joy to people's lives. It can help direct their path. It can do all kind of things like that. So I'm a type of person who has no need whatsoever to mock anyone's religion. Because I don't see the value in it, especially if it is valuable to them. Now, when religion gets to the point where it's causing harm, death, and murder, and all the other things that come along with certain aspects of religion throughout history, I have trouble with that. But don't misunderstand, we are not mocking religion here in any way, especially from my point of view, because I respect those who have a religion in their heart, and I have no problem with it. But we are going to be talking about some pretty insane things today, so please take that caveat to heart. But George, when you were doing your preparation for talking about conspiracy theories within religion, which is it's a tough one, right? Because there's plenty of people on this planet who would say that religion in itself is a conspiracy theory.
Well, conspiracy theory by definition is that more than two or more people are thinking about doing the same thing for a prolonged period of time and coming to some sort of benefit out of it. But you know what? uh, Two or more people praying that there's goodwill in the world
Yep,
or favor for someone who's come to some sort of harm. Is that really a conspiracy theory?
I don't think so. No, I don't. And of course, we've got to keep in mind that the most charitable people on this planet are Christians, right?
Charity came from Christianity.
In a way. That's not actually accurate. We've had charity throughout history of man, but the modern use of charity and stuff, which we could have a conversation, an argument whether charity is something that should be done anyway, simply because most, 99.999% of all charities are built to make money. and you give to charity very low percentage of the money you put is actually going to go toward the intent of the charity. Like for instance, Bono, you too, that big mouth who never shuts up about trying to save something or another. That guy's got himself a charity, and his rate is really amazing. 80 to 90% of all the money that comes into his charity goes toward operations. What a wonderful
Yep, just
charity
like
he's got.
yep, just like Red Cross and the Clinton charity.
Yeah, right. Well, Clinton charity is a little higher than that, but this is another whole nother conversation, I guess. And maybe we should do a show about the conspiracy theory that is charity, because it's really unfortunate. Because the concept of a person's good in their heart wanting to give money to help some less fortunate individual or help with some disease or something like that, it's a wonderful idea. But they're being bamboozled. Unfortunately, is what's going on, and this happens all over the place. Matter of fact, one of the few places I've seen that actually charity is done correctly, oddly, is here in Japan. And they have certain charities that are non-government attached that are just as suspect as any other. But they actually have government. I think it's more of a charity law. But they'll have little charities from the high schools or various different things to raise money for this endeavor or that endeavor. And by law, it must operating costs must be done aside. So they'll have grants or funding or something like that that will fund the operation of it, and 100% of all the money coming in must go to the charity, to the actual expense of what's supposed to be being done. So that's the only place I've seen this being that's seen this is done. Now, if it's in your country they're doing that, then stuff will let us know. But in general, this is not what happens. Now, I mentioned charity and sticking on it here a little bit because it's very much connected to the Christian religion, and in general the concept of religion itself, which is not necessarily true, but it's at least the perception. But we are not going to be talking about Christianity particularly. Well, I'm not going to be very directly. I'm going to be talking more about religions that have popped up in the modern time that have taken advantage of the idea of Jesus or something like that and made it a commercial success. This is the conspiracy theory I'm looking at. What are you looking at today, George?
I'm looking at a production that James Cameron did way back in 2007. He titled it "The Lost Tomb of Jesus." It was about, I think it was an hour or 2 hour production,
Hmm.
and he actually put his name to it. And he was a producer, and he talks about the trip that they took to Israel
Hmm.
and to a very interesting tomb in the heart of a community where you can only find it by actually going down a particular manhole and then going through a hole that is attached to the manhole that is thousands of years old, right into an actual tomb where apparently the entire family line of Jesus is resting. The physical bodies.
I see. Now, when you mentioned initially, I didn't recall it, but have you talked about it before a little bit offline and continuing now? I'm seeming to remember a little bit about that. But that should be interesting to get into and see what Mr. Cameron had to say. It is interesting. I will bring this off since what that's dealing with Jesus and, of course, Christianity. The Jews in general have their religion is pretty old and they've been around for a long time. Of course, you guys know that I do a lot of translations, and a lot of my specialty is in the area of Mesopotamia, and of course, Sumer and Akkad and Assyria and all that stuff. This is where the Jews are from, of course. The Hebrews, Hyksos, they are Mesopotamian. That's what they are. So I know a lot about their earlier aspects of their religion than what would be more present day knowledge. But the interesting things about the Jews that a lot of people don't know is they have a lot of books. They have these extra books, kind of like Islam does, which talks about various saints or prophets. So they don't use the word saint, I guess, but prophets and teachers throughout the ages and their writings and studying those. excuse me, where in Christianity, particularly with the Protestant types, it's really the Bible and the Bible only. The Catholics do have some extra books; they have their saints and stuff like that. But the Jews, in particular, like the Muslims, they do have these extra books. The Muslims call them the Hadiths, but the Jews, of course, have their own. And in those books, it's very interesting. Jesus is actually mentioned several times, and the interesting concept coming out of the Jewish religion about Jesus is they hate him with a passion. They truly hate that guy, and you don't know this talking to a Jew or looking from a Jew from the outside that this is part of their religion, but it is, and I've read them, and it is very interesting. That's not something most people would be aware of, but because of that, every time I see some production that is being funded and run by Jewish peoples, I always take it with a grain of salt. Now, of course, I also keep in mind that a lot of the American Jews are very secular, and religion means nothing to them. So I do keep that in mind. But this is always a bit suspect to me, and I'm kind of curious of where Cameron stands on that. Do you know anything about his religious background?
And I believe Cameron is agnostic. I
Okay.
think because I'm just recalling the video that I had seen well over 10 years ago. I've actually seen it on broadcast, and it actually struck me as quite interesting. The one thing that did bring to light
Mhm.
is that even though, from my assumption that Cameron was agnostic, um, is that he statistically worked out the discovery of the tomb to a point where you either accept it as credible
Mhm.
or you just uh, be blind to it, willfully blind to it.
Yeah, no, and that's fine. And of course, like I said, a lot of American Jews in particular are extremely secular and agnostic in general. So it's what I'm saying doesn't necessarily apply. It depends on the individual involved, especially when you get the Zionists involved, and they're very well, they have agendas, you know. But nevertheless, this is all kind of part of the conversation. Religion. If it's any of this offends you, we do apologize, but we're going to try to look at this as analytically and as honestly as possible. I'm not going to hold anything back just because someone might be offended. Nevertheless, Roger Heller says, "Hey, all right, how are all these conspiracy hunters doing today? Hopefully, fantastic, excellent." Hugh Jazz does say that Mecca Leka Hi Mecca Hi Ni Ho. Thank you. That's very nice of you, dude. Eagle 43's Canada is the Illuminati. Maybe, dude. Pokes Dexter says, is this different than controversial religious beliefs like human medicine is bad, etc.? Well, it's interesting you mentioned that, actually. This is not really something I plan to talk about, but let's take modern day Turkey, for instance. I think that's a good example for what you said there, Pope Star, Dexstar. Um, Turkey, of course, was a rather modern country not too long ago. They would teach evolutionary Darwinism right alongside creationism. They were very modern moving and modern thinking. And of course, this all comes from Ataturk out of the when they came out of the war. They decided to become a very modern country, democratic country, and Ataturk is the one who pushed that. But nevertheless, we're of course under a very different regime right now, who's doing their best to bring back the hardcore orthodoxy of Islam. And in doing so, there are a lot of things going on in Turkey right now that are destroying all the progress they had made and reverting back to the old ways. And particularly when it comes to medicine, there are actually billboards in Turkey as you're driving around that you can see that talk about don't listen to the modern Western medicine. It is poison. It is a lie. It is a viper. The old ways are the ways we need to go. And of course, we all know this is nonsense. People live a lot longer now and they live a lot healthier during that longer life than they did in the past. And this is because of modern medicines and stuff. Now, we could get into the conspiracy of the pharmaceutical companies and all the nonsense that they do, and that would be a true statement. But in general, medicine has improved greatly. And I think Turkey is a perfect example of that because it was a country that was doing really well and quite modern, and it's being thrown back into the dark ages, just like we saw what happened to Iran and Iraq. These countries were incredibly modern in the 70s, and now they're You walk around Afghanistan and it looks like you're sitting in the Middle Ages, right? This is what they're doing to themselves, and it's unfortunate. and I don't think all medicines are perfect. I don't think we should rely on medicines more than we have to, but they've certainly shown that they do make our lives better. Combo Bob says, "Sup." What's up with you, dude? Uh, Demonicking Investigations says, "Howdy." Well, howdy. Pets of Warcraft. Awesome. Canada is the sucks for this stuff. Look at the Trudeau Foundation. Yeah, Trudeau is such a ridiculous. He's so fake. You can see him from a mile away, dude. Combo Bob says Scientology, People's Church, Jim Jones, pretty much any televangelist. Yes, I'm definitely going to get into that, dude. Roger Heller says, how about the Greek Orthodox Church? Well, being that they're Orthodox, and the Greeks are, of course, the ones that wrote the Septuagint. Most of the modern Christians today are working off the translation of the Septuagint. So I don't know that that really accounts for it, but I am going to bring up a supposition today that might apply. So we'll see. We'll get back to that. We have the Rosicrucians and the Jesuits as well have added text. Now, dude, I didn't get into the Rosicrucians. I could have, I suppose, but I didn't. And I'm also haven't got into the Jesuits. But to be fair, we could do a freaking series on the Jesuits, dude. Those guys are trouble with two bags, man. I mean, they're real trouble, the Jesuits. And maybe we should do a show on the Jesuits, George.
If we do, we got to talk about only 2 points that is important to the Jesuits: the Black Pope,
Hmm.
and the fact that the Jesuits demand that you do not marry, you do not have kids, you go into that particular land or country, you become part of the people, and then you mess them up.
Yeah, no, that's what the Jesuits are. We can. I mean, I'm not going to get into it, but we can cover it slightly. You understand that with say Islam, maybe modern people would understand this a little bit clearer because of all the stuff that's been going on the past decade. But with Islam, they have a couple of things they do. They have this rule that says you can lie as much as you want when amongst the enemy, which is anyone who's not a Muslim, and to get to making Allah. The prominent in that society, and that includes all kind of sexual activities, drugs, whatever. They use it to excuse all manner of activity. So you have this aspect that Islam does, and you also have the mosque. Now, the mosque is very different from a church in a couple of key ways. The church is, traditionally it was built with they would go in, they'd kill off all the shamans and all the people like that, and then they would just burn down their stuff and they'd build a church, and that was the only place you could get help or information or advice or what have you. So this is a way to, propagandize and control the community. The Christians did this too, but with the Muslims, they take it. It's weird, but people might get upset that I say this, but the Muslims, in a way, are more honest because they're very direct. They come with a sword and they demand with the sword. And the mosque is actually a military barracks. It's a fort. It's intended to be a place that is a court. It's a religious facility. It's a governmental city hall. It's a barracks for soldiers. The mosque is everything. And this is what Islam does. They'll bring those two things in, whereas the Christians will, particularly the Catholics, I should say, more particularly the Christians are a more modern thing with the Protestants in particular. But the Catholics, they used to do something similar. Of course, they've had their Reformation, and they've changed incredibly since that. But the point I'm trying to make with the Jesuits were exactly that. They were the ones sent in to terrorize communities and cause them to convert to the Catholic beliefs. So that's what the Jesuits are, and there's a long history of them, and they're not done. By the way, they're still causing lots of trouble. So we could do a full show on them for sure. Combo Bob says the Freemasons and Illuminati controlling church is a good conspiracy. It is. We covered that a little bit. We're not going to do that much today. And then we have Demonicking says, I'd love to see that, but there's much to it. There's so much to it. Yeah, there is, dude. Yeah, that would take me. I would have to do research and prepare an actual presentation on the Jesuits. I could do it though. It would just take a little bit of time. Hey, Pope, what's up? Pope is here, but she's not talking to me. I must have been a bad boy.
Maybe she'll talk to me.
Hi,
Hi,
sorry,
Pope.
I'm here. I was just trying to get my TV remote because I was trying to get the show I was watching turned off.
That's all right. How you doing today? You want to come in and talk religious conspiracies?
Well, I heard you talking about Catholics, and Catholics involve popes.
They do.
So, I was thinking, hey, this is a perfect one for me.
Oh,
Well,
do
it is.
tell.
It is, but
Yeah.
unfortunately, in the modern conversation, the Catholic Church doesn't apply as much to what we're talking about today because they had a Reformation 400 years ago that radically shifted them away from a militant religion into, what we have a more secular, commercialized religion of today. So they had this of
Right.
course is desperately what Islam needs. Islam needs a Reformation. If they had a Reformation, there would be no problem. You probably have a bunch of people join just because it's different and interesting, but that's not where we're sitting with them. But those are I'm covering these points because that's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about other things. But we do have a pope with us, so all's well. That may end well, George. But
Well,
Anyway, George, you are sharing screen. Yours is up. So I'll let you go first today. Go ahead and talk to us about James Cameron and his hidden tomb of Jesus. Should be interesting.
yes, yeah. This information is right there in front of you. It's just that not a lot of people have been paying attention to it. It's been around since 2007 when his little production came to light on the Discovery Channel.
Hmm.
You can type in YouTube, the Lost Tomb of Jesus, and you will get a lot of people talking about James Cameron's video. A lot of people. So there's no shortage of let's put it this way, uh, rebuttals.
I'd
The
imagine,
interesting
yeah.
Yeah, the interesting thing is there's a lot of videos here. A lot of them claim to be the Lost Tomb of Jesus production
Hmm.
for in terms of video. You really have to dig, and you won't find it because, of course, it's under copyright law, and it will not appear on YouTube. You have to watch it when it appears on the Discovery Channel, or you order the copy for your viewing pleasure. Now, I'm going to go through the video and what it pertained in through the whole thing. And the thesis of the video is this: they found the physical bodies of the family of Jesus in a rural area in Israel. You had to actually go to a manhole at a particular location, go down the manhole, and then a side tunnel will take you right into that tomb. This production was on Discovery Channel, Vision TV in Canada on March 4, 2007. That's why I was watching. I just happened to be watching one of those particular channels at that time. When it played, it was interesting to me. It was so interesting that I actually kept tabs of it and learned as much as I can. What I learned recently is that everything that I needed to know, they actually just dumped right into Wikipedia,
Hmm.
which is sometimes a very good thing, and most of the times not a very good thing. So don't go looking for stuff that you don't know about. You'll probably be misguided. The tomb itself is burial boxes, and the one thing about these burial boxes is this: James Cameron would actually did a statistical analysis
Hmm.
of what is in the tomb itself, and he said, "Okay, well, you know what? Let's look at this tomb and do a statistical analysis on the possibility that this can be the family of Jesus in here." Okay, first of all, the names on the tomb: Yeshua, Maria, Yoshi. Um, I can't pronounce a lot of these names in the proper Hebrew pronunciation.
Yeshua,
Yeda,
Maria, Yose, Yehunda.
yeah,
I can't even see that one. That's so small. Uh, Marinine. It's okay. It's
Otsazuma.
okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm reading
Okay,
the script up there, and that says Yeshua Ba. So
so the thesis was very simple, very simple. As the names were called out, they said, "Oh, how many people in that particular time, 2,000 years ago, were with that name?" And they said, "Well, let's say 2,000 people." Okay, how many people with that name were married or part of had a sister with this name? And the number started to statistically get smaller. Okay, well then, how about we add another name to this family? The statistics start getting smaller and smaller. By the time they got all the way through the entire tomb of names, the statistics became one. One meaning that this is the tomb of the lost tomb of Jesus, the physical remains, not nothing more than that, or it's not. Or it's not, meaning that you just willfully do not believe it.
okay,
So, in a mathematical sense, in scientific sense, and this is where the irony comes in. Scientifically, the spirituality of Jesus is right before you, also buried underneath a particular suburb in Israel. Now, the one thing that really puts a kibosh in this is that the tomb was raided many years ago during a construction event, and
hmm
one of the caskets or boxes that had the remains were removed, and that was James, the brother of Jesus. His body was removed. Now the thing is, it was removed, but it's in stasis, or what do you call it? In
I don't know.
preservation in one of the museums.
I see. Okay.
But they couldn't definitely connect James' coffin or body parts to the actual tomb. They were able to um, follow the line where the construction crew stopped for a moment because they saw there was a tomb. They broke into a tomb. They had to bring in the city officials to recognize this. Do we bulldoze over it, or do we preserve it? Do we work around it? During that um, time of unknown, somebody in the construction crew actually took one of the bodies and
hmm
went to sell it to the nearby museum for a
Of
couple of
course.
dollars.
Yes.
A grave robber. So, but if that wasn't stolen, it wasn't removed from the tomb, that one body, that last body, if it was there inside that tomb, it would 100%, without any ifs, ands, or buts, be the declaration that this is the lost tomb of Jesus and his family.
hmm
So you go from 1 to 0, meaning zero. There is no doubt whatsoever.
Well,
So go ahead, Chester. You have questions?
Well, I do because it brings up to a couple of points. I mean, are we talking about Yeshua here? Or are we talking about Jesus? I think is very important because a lot of the aspects of the Bible, particularly the crucifixion and the the militaristic side of what happened during that time, is actually Jesus, and that's not Yeshua, not the son of God, Yeshua. They've been mixed over time. Now Yeshua himself was certainly a character moving around in those ages, and I suppose it could be a tomb of Yeshua, but it's certainly not a tomb of Isis. For without question, it's not. So I'm just
Right.
curious, which character is this supposed to be?
Well, they didn't make the distinction. I don't remember them making the distinction, and the distinction is not um, in the text here. Excuse me. In Wikipedia, all they're doing is going through the actual information and doing it in a very clinical, scientific
Sure.
manner without delving too much into any spirituality at all. They're just
I
treating
get it.
it
I get it.
as another tomb.
Well, Comic Book Bob has a good point here. He says, didn't they do a DNA test on the Mary tomb and the Jesus tomb and found they didn't share DNA?
Yes, yes, there was DNA tests, and also there was plenty of tests. It was ridiculous. And let's just go a little further down. And not only that, is that they were able to confirm some and not confirm others. It wasn't a not confirm. It was what's the word? It's you can't confirm it or deny it. It's inconsistent or there's a word for something unknown.
Hmm.
They were not able to do a negative or a positive during the testing. I know it doesn't make sense, but in some cases when they're actually doing all these tests, a lot of it is about carbon dating and whatnot.
Hmm.
Uh, they just don't have the accuracy uh, that they purport to have.
I see. Well, it's certainly interesting, and the fact that James Cameron found it interesting and took time out of his busy schedule and money to make a documentary is certainly interesting into it of itself. But I do think there, of course, is the reason why there's so much controversial or opposing videos is because of so much of the information we know now is controversial itself. Like for instance, the Yeshua character who many aspects of the modern Bible have some of his stories and things he did in it. We don't even know how he died. Right, whereas Jesus was certainly crucified, but it showed that Josephus was one of the person that paid to have take him off the cross, and they were made a decision later. We have Roman documentation on this, by the way. This isn't speculation, and he was basically interred in the special VIP prison they had up in Ireland, the Romans had. And of course, we don't know if he died there or what happened with him. Of course, some people say that when he escaped there, he ended up or when he got released from there, he ended up in Kashmir, where they say there's another tomb of Yeshua, but not Yeshua, Isis. But there's a lot of confusion going on right now, and it's because the modern translation of the Bible has taken not only some of the aspects of mysterism and with coming out of the cult of Horus, mixing that in with the Jesus story. They also have mixed the story of the general, the king Isis, who was making a legitimate claim to the throne of Rome, with Yeshua, who was another character who was a prophet, and he was moving around and talking about a more Buddhist or Eastern approach to religion and trying to change things. I mean, so these three figures, one of them being seemingly completely supernatural, another one being a militaristic king, and the other one being an actual religious prophet, have been mixed together to give us this general modern vision of what the Jesus is. And it's kind of hard to pick through and disseminate and separate what is what and who is who. So is this the actual tomb of Yeshua, the prophet? Well, maybe. It's certainly not the tomb of Isis and his wife, and his woman, or at least his servant he had along with him, which of course was Mary the Magdalene, right? But then again, finding a woman named Mary at the time was like throwing a stone, kind of like today. So, interesting, George. I don't know. What does the chat think about all of that? I'm being very analytical about it, and I understand there's a religious element, and that's all well and good too. And the Ori were defeated by the SG-1, so they are irrelevant. You're absolutely right, Comic Book Bob. I love SG-1, by the way. Let's see here. Pope Dexter says, I am a fan of the Simcha Jekovic documentary, The Exodus Decoded. Yeah, so am I, dude. That is very, very interesting. But thank you, George. Interesting conversation. If you guys have anything you want to state on what George is putting forward here, this Cameron thing about finding the tomb of I'm assuming Yeshua, then that would be then give us what you think. I think it's pretty cool. I think it is. Now let me come over here and share my screen with you guys. Uh, Try not to give away our thing there. I want to get have bad things happen to us like it happened to Edwin and such. But I'm going to go over here, George. I'm going to start sharing what I've prepared here, and there we go. All right. Now, I put together a couple things here, guys, as well, and just go ahead and comment. I'm going to do my thing. Come back, take a look, comment on what you think George has to say. I'm going to put some things forward here, and then get some information from and from you guys as far as what you think about what I'm presenting. Now, today, what I wanted to talk about in general was kind of how certain charismatic individuals in modern times have taken the idea of Christianity and, in my opinion, warped it to their own financial gain. That's what I want to talk about. Now, I did put up here a little image of the Shroud of Turin, and of course, the Shroud of Turin is certainly an interesting piece material, which would conflict with what George is talking about. Of course, but the interesting thing about the Shroud of Turin is whether it's a image of Yeshua himself. I have no idea, but what I do know is that the Shroud of Turin is a real deal. It is a real thing. It's they're still scientifically confused at how something like this could happen, because this is a negative that has been imprinted onto cloth. It is of age. There's been a lot of people try to debunk this. There's a lot of people come at it. You've even had people come up and claim they did it, and of course proven not to do it. Idiots, a lot of them. But the interesting thing about this, in the end, it is an actual ancient piece of cloth that does have an image upon it. Now, what that means beyond that, I don't know. But it is fascinating to me that after all these decades of tearing into this piece of cloth, in the end, we find out that it is a thing. Now, what do you guys think it is? Where do you stand on it? What about you, George? About the Shroud of Turin?
I believed it the first time I saw it on back what in the 70s when they had those really those undiscovered mystery channel
Yeah, Leonard
shows and stuff like
Nimoy.
that.
Yeah, sure, like that.
Yeah,
In Search of. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah. And then in the 80s, they there was a whole bunch of different shows or documentaries saying, "Oh, this whole shroud is it's not true." And then the 90s, they rubber band back and said, "Well, we got new testing. It looks like it's true. It looks not 100%." And then 2000 and after that, they start to go wishy washy and say, "Well, this could be something else. It's not really this. It's not really that."
Mhm.
It's like there's so much information. It's like information Armageddon. Uh, at this point, do I even care if it's true or not? There's just so much information out there that
Mhm.
contradicts each other, and I don't even know who to believe anymore. There's
Yeah,
just
yeah.
too much of it.
Well, that's fair. That's a fair point. And this type of oversaturation of information is in itself a form of disinformation, right? So that's certainly could be applicable, I think. But the one thing to take away from the turn, the Shroud of Turin, it is a real thing. It is historically timed. And there was some arguments because of the dating on it was putting it a little bit later than it should have been. And this of course, brought up a bunch of controversy. But of course, we know now that the whole thing with ISIS. And the stuff he was doing, which is the main part of, the in the garden, the sword, the ear, the crucifixion, all that kind of stuff is Isus actually, and we do know that was during the Jewish revolt, the uprising, and that was in around 70 A.D., not 32 A.D. So with that modern understanding of that, now placing things in a more accurate time frame, it matches up perfectly. And that once again that brings up a conversation about carbon dating and stuff in general. But that's another conversation for another day. But I would say that the most interesting thing to me about the Shroud of Turin is there's blood on it, and they tested the blood, and it is AB negative. Now, that in itself is pretty interesting. I'm an O negative myself, and I actually know a lot a bit about the recessive recessive blood genes and the Rh negative aspect. I know a lot about that. I've studied a lot about it. I've even written chapters in books, scientific journals and stuff about it. And the interesting thing about that is science doesn't really understand where this Rh negative comes from. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't fit within the understanding of biology and the genome or DNA in general, genetics. But yet it is, and it exists. And the fact that you have an AB negative person in itself is exceedingly rare. That you would even find a person like that, because in general, AB negative is even more rare than me. Which is O negative, but of course mine is more restrictive though, because my blood can be used for every human on the planet, even AB negative. I'm the universal donor, but yet I can't be universally doned to. I need to have my own blood, the O negative only. So it's even though it's a AB negative is more rare than me, mine is more restrictive. But nevertheless, it is fascinating to me that the fact that the blood that they did find on it confirming to be AB negative is fascinating unto itself. But anyway, that's a short of turn. You guys have all heard about it. You know about it. And do me a favor, George, while I'm going through this presentation back here, do keep an eye on the chat, please, while I go through this. But that's something I want to mention. And the other stuff I want to mention is more about people who have taken Christianity and and used it for their own financial gain. This is what I want to talk on. I'm going to start really soft and I'm going to end hard. So here's my start. My start is with this. Over here in Japan, did you know that Jesus is buried? Oh, yes. Matter of fact, they say that it was actually his brother Ishikuri, which is a Japanese name, by the way, was actually the one crucified on the cross, whereas the real Jesus escaped to Japan, where he had been before. His youthful years were not spent in India or other places. It was in Japan, and he lived here and then went back over to bring his message, and then escaped back to Japan and ended up dying as a farmer. And did you know this? Isn't it interesting? And look at this wonderful thing. You can get your picture taken from a cutout with the baby Jesus and his family. And this is so Japanese, dude. It's incredibly Japanese. And matter of fact, the dude who put this forward and made this a commercial success to a point, nearby, he also found the oldest pyramid on the planet. Did you know? So here in Asia, there is a tendency toward cultism and being a follower. And it's just kind of part of the Asian culture, to be honest with you. It's just the way they are. They're community based. It's about what can you do for the community, whereas in the West, it's what can you do to make yourself better and therefore be useful to the community. It's really I versus us. And they both have their benefits, of course. But one of the negative parts of the us together thing is everyone tends to be a follower. And of course, we have tons of cults over here in Asia, and they can be troublesome. They can be to the point where dangerous, like Om, who is led by Asahara, of course, so was responsible for the sarin attacks in the Tokyo subway, right? And that was kind of a famous, infamous event. This has not become that, although it is religion. They do suck a lot of money, all the old people. It's kind of disgusting, but this cult exists, and they claim without reservation that Jesus is buried right there. And you can go visit that site and give them money to go and look at the tomb of Jesus. What do you think about that, George?
Um, I am flabbergasted. I didn't even know Jesus could row his boat across this
No,
ocean.
right.
Yeah, or portage over mountains.
Exactly. Well, now do keep in mind that at this time in history, of course, the Roman Empire was a very efficient thing, and the Silk Road did exist. You could travel from west to east quite easily. Actually, it wasn't as though Hollywood likes to make it look deadly and dangerous. It wasn't. It was actually just kind of a long distance highway that had little water stops all along the way. It wasn't very difficult at all, actually. So getting from the Middle East or Rome or Italy or wherever into the depths of Asia and China and even unto Wa at the time, which we call Japan today, is possible. It's certainly possible. But of course, at the time, the Japanese were exceedingly primitive. Although the Japanese probably don't like to talk about it, China has always been the center of Asia. Their culture is very old. They've been sophisticated for a very long time. Now, to be fair, the cultures of Mesopotamia, Egypt are older. But then again, there's some argument that goes, especially when you get into the conversations of Hyperborea. But that is a very long conversation I'm not going to get into here. Although I would probably enjoy doing a presentation on the Arctic Circle Hyperborean culture that we have found. Every year it goes by, we find more actually, which would bring Asia back into the conversation a little bit more. But nevertheless, it's just fascinating to me that something so absurd as this actually caught on, and there are adherents who actually put money into it. I'm not kidding, right? Now let's take one step up from this absurdity to another level of absurdity: the Unification Church, the Moonies. Insanity on top of insanity. This is a Jesus cult, and this from South Korea. You see the leader and his wife there. The true father and the true mother is what they call it. And basically, what they have done was they've taken the Bible. And he has added writings to the Bible that he says that Jesus couldn't talk about at the time because it was too sensitive. But now he can talk about it. And of course, the one of the craziest things about the Moonies is basically they worship these two, right? And the other point being is they have mass marriages. Now, these mass marriages are even more confusing and interesting than the simple idea of a mass marriage. Actually, what happens is you, as a man, show up, and you, as a woman, show up. You are paired with a person you've never met before, and you are married on the spot in mass. These are the Moonies. These are more, they're Moonies or loonies. They're insane. And if you go take a little bit of time to do a little bit of research into them, you'll see exactly how crazy they are. Now, the Mormons can often sound kind of crazy in the things they do, but they are far more organized and, of course, a lot older than the Moonies. But as I'm moving along here, I'm going to go to my last one in a minute. When I was putting this together, the thought came to me: what if this is how religions start throughout history? And the ones that are more successful, like, say, the Mormons, because the Mormons were created by Smith, right? John Smith, in a very similar way. He said he had information, and he produced this thing which has no antiquity to it whatsoever, but that being that the an angel gave it to him, just like Muhammad did with Islam. And he said that this was the real word of God. This was angels, and he was talking about Jesus being in the Americas. Now, Jesus, he got around, it seems. He was all over the place because he was with the Native Americans as well. And of course, they talk about, I don't know how deeply you guys understand Mormonism, but they also talk about the Jews have traveling to the New World long ago. And it's very fascinating, actually. It's a good read. If you've never read the Mormon texts, you should go read it. It's just interesting. But at the time, it was highly mocked because it was absurd and silly as this crazy Mooney thing and Jesus being buried in Japan. But today, Mormons are taken very seriously, aren't they? Right? So I'm kind of curious what you guys think. Is this how religion becomes? Some kind of charismatic leader comes up with some crazy idea that a certain group follow, and then a certain percentage of those creations become permanent. Is this possible? Is this maybe just simply the formula or the mechanism that creates religion? Or is there something deeper to it? Does it need actual spiritualism? Does it need actual gods or some kind of exalted being to be involved in the conversation? I'm curious what you think
Well,
because, go ahead, George.
well, that's interesting that you say this because there's a couple of things that are coming out of this conversation that actually just shocked me.
Hmm.
One is for the immediate right now is that your questioning falls back to a certain strategy where you lie and you
Uh-huh.
continue lying until the public or the masses who are listen to that lie eventually accept it as truth.
Right. Eh,
And secondly, all this uh, technology and society moving backwards,
mhm.
moving basically to the Stone Age, and not accepting medicine, not accepting
Oh, yeah.
technology, all that
It's a
stuff.
real deal.
Yeah, we are literally watching a slow train wreck, where the destruction of society has happened many times as a pattern in history.
Oh, sure. Yeah, and it's very common for religious groups to fall back upon traditional things and resist or completely have complete revulsion for modern things. We can see this with the Quakers, the Mennonites, and various other groups in America, where they don't even you can't even have a modern button because that's sinful. Right, this reversion to a more traditional time, whereas I can understand the appeal of it, I truly can. It is not necessarily better. It's far better to take the troubles of today and to try to make the world a better place, really. But most religions don't do that. They fall back into traditionalism, and they kind of garner themselves behind their own gates. And I get that too. I understand why it happens. I'm just saying, unfortunately, it's not what we need to do. Modernity is not a bad thing, especially if it's used properly. Modern medicine is not a bad thing, especially if it's used properly. But this is a very consistent thing with religions, particularly new ones. And I think these are perfect examples. I could have chose a whole bunch of them. I tried to pick stuff in Asia because you guys were, of course, Mooney's being from South Korea. You guys were talking about more conspiracy theories in Asia, so I thought I'd hint here. To be honest with you, I could have went back as far as Zoroastrianism or other things like that. I could have gone deeper, but those are so old, it's hard to argue their antiquity. Right, and oddly, but here we have things that are very modern. Like, for instance, the Moonies came out in the 50s, right? And their leaders are still alive, making money, right? So it's more applicable to our modern conversation, I think. But let me go to my my last one, which I think is the most telling. Sign.
Hold that thought for a moment. We have a lot in the chat.
All right, well, let me come
Have
back
I- have
over
I-
real quick then. Let me come
Yeah.
back over there. But I am going to be talking about Scientology here momentarily. But yeah, let me come back over to chat. Let me see here. The all right, da da da. I'm only a fan of okay. I just got here. Hey, Evan, what's going on? Comic Bob says, yeah, the Josephus story is an interesting read, though they found some inaccuracies in it, especially in regards to the siege of Masada. Yeah, no, I understand that, but it seems pretty obvious to me from all the evidence put forward that the 19, excuse me, the 80s, 70s uprising and revolt from the Jewish state or the Hebrew state at the time is really when the was the time of ISIS and all those conversations. I think it's been proven quite enough for me anyway. Pope Dexter says, if what Christians believe is true, then you'll never find the body. That's right. That's the controversy, right, Pope? Comic Book Bob continues. That's a good story. Hare Krishna. That's another one I could have talked about. I could have spoke about. Excuse me. Kumbo Bob says there was a scientist who proved they could have done the shroud at the time it's dated. Well, all right, that's fine. But I think it's just over the decades, as George said, it's just a preponderance of conversation that makes you not interested in it. But it is a legitimate thing. It doesn't mean it's legitimately Jesus. It just is a thing. Let's see here. Pope Dexter says it's a legitimate burial cloth with an imprint of whoever was buried in it. That's all we know. And it is a fascinating piece of a relic or artifact for sure. Because how did that negative come onto it? How that it's a very fascinating thing unto itself. And they've proven it's not painted, it's not pigmented, it's not. This thing has been put through scientific testings 100 times, guys. It is a real thing. It just we don't know who it's a real thing of. But it is real. Pope Dexter says only the wealthy got buried in the tombs generally. So if it wasn't Jesus, it was likely to be someone with resources and tied to the elite. Well, yes, true. But do keep in mind that whether you're talking about Josephus or Joseph of Arimathea, which they're actually the same people, but you'll have some people argue that they're not. Either way, super rich, super influential Romans that actually paid for the burial of Jesus. So we know that he was buried from these stories in a very expensive and elite way. We know that. Um, let's see here. Well, the Mormons believe he came to the Americas, so why not Japan, right? Why not? And yeah, Shinikyo. Yeah, real asshole. Yep. The dude was a straight whack job. Yes, he was. The thing I can't believe is that still exists. They changed the name to Aleph. Yes, they're still around. But that's the interesting thing about Japan, guys. In Japan, you're actually allowed to have a freedom of opinion. You're actually allowed to be free. And it sometimes becomes a problem for the Japanese, but they understand the value of it, and they're even to the point that they're willing to sacrifice children, dare I say, to this aspect of freedom. Let me explain that. We occasionally have problems where a child who's being raised by a useless mother. And maybe there's a boyfriend around, maybe not. Maybe there's a father, maybe not. But you got these useless parents that mistreat or neglect the child, and the child ends up dying. And of course, the people around it's like, well, we call the cops, we try to do this, we try to do that, but the problem is the police will come to the door. They'll knock on the door to try to have a conversation with you. But if you don't answer the door, well, then they can't do anything about it. They can't break into your house just because the neighbor said, "Oh, they're doing something weird to the kid." They can't do that. They need more than proof. And although that sounds kind of ridiculous, if you look at the actual situation with the child services in America, whatever it's called in your area, it's gone way, way past acceptable what they do. Especially when you look into the fact that a lot of the people who work for that and the people who are drawn to that are single, angry women, and they cause all manner of trouble in the West, dude. I'm not being anti. This isn't a feminist point. This is just a litigious, bureaucratic point. And we see a lot of nastiness coming out of child services. Whereas over here in Japan, they're very cautious, very, very cautious, to the point that occasionally kids die. And that's a horrible thing. It's incredibly sad. It makes the whole nation sad because when that happens, it's on the news. Everyone knows about it. We don't have the level of crime that you would find even in the safest American town. We don't have that. So when something bad happens, the entire country knows about it. But the Japanese understand the value of privacy and personal rights, so that they won't even go to that point. And this is why, coupled with the fact that Asians in general tend to be are community based and therefore susceptible to following ideologies, this is why things like exist. And trust me, there are thousands of those kind of cults in Japan. It is what it is. I mean, what would you prefer, George? You think it would be better to go with the Orwellian stormtrooper tactics of what's going on in the West right now, or the benefit of the doubt, which occasionally ends up in the death of some children? What do you think, George?
Um, well, that's an interesting scenario, isn't it? It's like a Kobayashi Maru. It's a no-win scenario.
It is, isn't it? Yeah.
You either give up your freedom for safety, or you hold on to your freedom with the possibility of a lot more pain. There's consequences on both ends, and that's the problem.
Yeah.
And I can't decide because both options, even though that you haven't mentioned it, end with physical harm and death.
Sometimes.
If you give up your freedom, and there's death involved in that decision, it won't be you, but it will be somebody else who will be hurt or killed.
Yeah.
And so you're damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Yeah, no, and in the end, I always want to lean on the side of personal freedom. I know that you can make an argument that there is no freedom today. We are the most overworked, overtaxed people in the history of the world. And most people don't even understand that. You work a lot more hours than, say, the medieval peasant did, or some average slave from the past. You actually put a lot more hours in the day than they did. And of course, our taxation levels are ridiculous. I mean, in America, what are you guys looking at? 47 to 50% after you look at all the various taxes you pay. So half your income is going toward paying someone's tax. I mean, it's insane. And you got to keep the Roman Empire survived for 1,000 years. And you know what their tax rate was? I mean, across the board, 10%. 10%. and they survive for years and years, decades and decades, centuries and centuries off of that amount. So the fact that today they need half of yours, and to be fair, in America, the tax rate is not as bad as other places, guys. You go to Europe, and you're talking about 60, 70, even 80% overall when you talk about all the taxes put together. Here in Japan, if you're a normal person, it's not as bad. But if you're a rich person, you don't want to live here. You don't want to be anywhere near Japan. They're just going to suck you dry. And that's what a lot of the rich people do. They end up having residencies in Panama of all places because of the
Well,
tax rate.
that's fascinating that you just said this, because it came back to a few things that I believe to be true,
Hmm.
and one is that the and not to be racist or anything, but the skin color that's had the greatest slavery is the white man.
That's
The
not
white
true.
man
Oh, you mean
is
to
that
be
true or not?
enslaved?
Enslaved,
Yeah, yeah, no,
enslaved.
that's true. That is true. Well, that's where the word comes from. Slave comes from the word Slav or Slavic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and the other thing is, um, we are, um, up until when was taxes actually implemented? Was it World War I or two?
Actually, the modern look of taxes that we have that have come into place happened at the turn of the 20th century. It was done on a Christmas Eve with a few Democratic congressmen sitting there together, passing with the new president. It was argued and complained. And do keep in mind, now this isn't going to say that you should not pay your taxes because they will get you if you don't. But do understand that the actual IRS and that federal tax was never ratified by the states. It never
Yeah,
was.
well, technically it's illegal, but the point I want to make is this. Excuse me, I was just taking a quick drink.
That's all right. Go ahead.
Um, in today's society, you are either a willful slave, meaning that you wake up in the morning, you spend most of your daylight hours working for somebody. At which point they will be taking at the end when you're getting a paycheck, they're going to take a was it 25 to 33% or more out of your effort and put it into somebody else's pocket.
Oh, sure.
Now, of course, that's capitalism, but I call it willful slavery.
Hmm.
It
Well,
means you're going along with it. Now, how do you get away from willful slavery? Is you build your own business.
this is true, but then they get you on the back end too. Particularly Democrats, they wanna get you hard. But no, I get your point, George, and I understand that everything is taxed. Matter of fact, that carbon tax thing that luckily Trump said nope, he nixed it. The rest of the world didn't though. That carbon taxes that are coming into play are actually the last little straw, because you know what they're doing? They tax you on everything, including water, right? But now that carbon tax is basically taxing you for breathing, right? So
Yeah,
they do tax you for
it's
everything.
happening
But
here in
here's the
Canada.
but here's the thing I want to the caveat I want to put on top of that, George. In the end, yes, we are taxed to our absolute nth degree. But I'm happy. I have the freedom to do what I want where I live anyway. I have a happy family. I'm happy with my wife. I'm happy with what I do. I'm happy, and I can live a happy life. We do live under a fiat currency, which means it's not real. Right? There is no value to your money whatsoever, but we all agree there is, and things are happy. Now, if things get to the point where they're not happy, like we're seeing in California or something like that, well, then you need to step in and make some kind of adjustments. But I don't want you to think that I'm sitting here whining about taxes because in the end, I wish it were different, but I'm also not unhappy. I'm happy. Therefore, it's okay. I can live with it, even though I understand it. So it's one of those weird little juxtapositions of understanding your foot is in the trap, but yet not minding it. It's an odd thing, but that's
I,
my
be, I,
stance.
be- I, be- I believe the word more accurately is you're comfortable. You're
Yeah,
not
I
happy.
am
I,
comfortable.
I don't I don't believe you're happy
I'm very
because
happy, dude.
you-
I'm a super happy dude. I don't have
you're
any stress at
comfortable.
all.
From my point of view, it looks like you're comfortable.
Uh huh.
You enjoy the way of life that you have.
Hmm.
But knowing that someone is taxing you for the burden of the work that you're doing, that doesn't make you happy. That just
Well,
makes you uncomfortable.
if I was living in the ever growing socialism of America, I would probably be less happy. But here, everyone is the same. This is something you have to understand. The Japanese do have a touch of, they have a weird capitalistic socialism that they do in Japan. But you have to understand that the whole population, I mean, I'm talking like 99%, 98% of the population is middle class. Everybody's middle class. Everyone has the same amount. Everyone has the same access. Everyone has the same. So when you're living in that, you don't feel oppressed because everyone is exactly the same. And we all have plenty. We can eat what we want. We can go where we want. We can do what we want. And in that environment, the fact that we are overtaxed and it doesn't matter because I can do everything I want. And I also understand exactly what a fiat currency is. I understand the economic standard of the planet. I understand it very clearly. Most people I don't think really understand how it works. Because I understand that, I understand there's no value anyway. And then you have to then it comes into this conversation this way, George. Yeah, and I think this is a fair point. Um, because fiat currency is just simply printing of money and not actually having any kind of gold value or any value at all behind the money. What it does is it does create this kind of tension that people are always worried about it. But here's the thing: if they just decided with when they you could do with a current currency, if they a current a fiat currency, if they just decided like, okay, well, we're going to freeze inflation, we're going to stick everything to this price, we're all going to agree that we get paid this amount, and then everything costs this amount, and everyone's happy with no stress, that would be a horrible thing. Because I think the governments of the world understand very clearly that humans perform best in the crucible. We need stress. We need worry. If we don't have that, we tend to fail. Idle hands are the devil's playground is not a useless proverb. It is quite accurate. And I think the fact that these governments are keeping this fiat currency at a point of always having a kind of stress behind it, where in Japan they don't overwhelm the stress, but there is a stress, it actually makes us more productive. That's another reason why I'm happy and don't really worry about it, George, because I understand that that's what they're doing. I understand the psychology behind the actual mechanism. You know what I mean?
Yes, I understand.
Cool. Well, let's see what the chat says because they got a lot to say. Jesus is with us. Obi-Wan reviews say, "Yes, he is. Sure, why not?" If you, I think you're onto something there, Chester. And yeah, dude, I'm not knocking on anyone's religion. If believing in a God makes you a happier person, makes you a better person, dude, keep it up, man. There's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. Pope Dexter says the masses are easily swayed by a charismatic voice. Yes, they are, particularly here in Asia, more so in the West. But in the West, I think it can happen, but maybe even be more destructive when it does. Pope Dexter says, "Who decided what's a proper use of modernity?" Fair point. Model Eagle 43 says Moon Men. Yeah, the Moonies are fascinating, dude. I'm not going to cover. We're kind of doing a general look at religious conspiracies here today, but I suggest you go check out the Moonies as well as the Mormons. It's fascinating stuff, guys. Eagle 43 says, "I come before you to stand behind you to tell you something I know nothing about." Comic Book Bob says, "I prefer dangerous freedom over peaceful slavery." So do I, dude. McCrank says Norwegian tax rate. Lol. Yeah, brother. And he's, of course, from Norway, so he knows what he's talking about. Dave says federal income tax was 1913, I think. Yes, I believe so. Yeah, and a lot of stuff happened in the 1920s. It's true. A lot of stuff did happen. A lot of these socialistic engineering and globalism in itself was really started back in that time, and they've been pushing real hard for it. We'll see what happens, but luckily in the end, it seems like people are starting to balk against the idea of globalism because when you look at globalism, like a lot of things, it has some beneficial things. I mean, think about it: the idea of everyone using the same money, everyone having the same tax system, everyone in the whole planet operating under the same government. It doesn't sound horrible. But then when you start looking deep into it, you realize that that is more than horrible. That is pure Orwellian. And people are recognizing that, and that's why they're starting to stand against it. That's right. It was never ratified, which is why it's voluntary. Yes, Dave, you're correct. But try not to pay your taxes and see what happens. They'll come at you, dude. But it is what it is, and I understand that. But anyway, let me go back and cover my last little bit, and then see what you guys have to say about this. Because my last bit of my presentation, as I'm sure you saw there for a moment, was the fact that let me come back over here and bring it back up. Here we go. Oh, there we go. All right, good, 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 good. Now, my last bit is here. Scientology. L. Ron Hubbard, a science fiction writer, has created this religion. And what he did was, is he basically took the old Mesopotamian stories that, of course, were found in the mid 19th century. They started finding all these archaeologists started finding all these old Sumerian cities and unlocking all of those various libraries. Of course, this is the one that DeWolf was talking about the other day. They also found in Syria, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. As many of you know, I'm actually part of that project. I do translate stuff. I'm a kind of a mid-tier type of guy, but still, there are hundreds and hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of tablets that need translating. They're written in Cuneiform or in the Assyrian languages or Sanskrit or what have you that need people to translate them. And I'm actually part of that world. It's in a little way anyway. But nevertheless, they took these kind of old ideas of the Sumerians, which I think most of us know now about the Anunnaki and all those kind of interesting, fantastical science fiction stories, and he adapted them to creating his own religion. Of course, at that time, they were very popular to talk about that stuff. We know that Sitchin came out in the 70s with his books. You have Von Däniken came out with his stuff. You even had some of the earlier stuff of Graham Hancock, and what was the guy that wrote about Mars? Life on Mars, Cities on Mars. I can't remember his name, but there's a whole bunch of them. It was a real hot topic, and of course, it still is because it's fascinating. It's fun. But he built a religion out of this, and this has become such a dangerous and vile organization that many of the European countries, and I think the EU in general, have outlawed them because of their practices. These guys are propagandists. They indoctrinate their people. They take their people's money at high rates. I mean, at least the Christians only take 10%. I mean, come on, right? These guys want everything. This is an evil organization. And I'm not afraid to say that. I'm not going to apologize for saying that either, because if you do any study into Scientology, these people are evil. They're straight up evil. And if you have any friends that are involved with it, or you have any people that are trying to come at you, help them if you can, because this is bad what they're doing here. And they're stealing people's money, they're indoctrinating people, they are brainwashing people. It is a straight up evil group. And what they've done is they've taken some of the old religious aspects of the past, mixed it with the Christianity. You see the little cross sitting up there, and they've basically, hijacked it for their own profit. Now, I understand you'll say, well, the Christian church is one of the richest organizations in the world. Excuse me, the Catholic Church is one of the richest organizations in the world. And you're right, they are. But they've also been at it for what, 1,500 years? 1,600 years even of saving wealth and money and gold and all that kind of stuff. And you want to talk about richness, go look at the Jews, the Hebrews. They're ridiculously wealthy, right? So yes, religion does make money, and I get that, but it's very different. Like I said, with the church, they take 10%. They want 10% of your tithe. And now you can argue whether that is good or bad, if that's evil, if it's a commercialism, et cetera, et cetera. You can make any kind of argue what you want, but it's far cry away from 100%. And that's what Scientology is all about. And this, I think, is a perfect example of a religious conspiracy because they are the conspiracy. We have this little group in Japan that has made some money, good bit of money, off of saying Jesus was buried in Japan with zero evidence, right? We have South Korean people that come up saying he knows what Jesus wanted to say but just couldn't say. And it has a religion on it that has, what, 100, 200,000 members worldwide? It's not as big as, say, Scientology, but it's big. That's not small, right? But here we bring to the granddaddy of religious conspiracies, in my opinion. Now, George, do you have anything you would like to talk about Scientology, or have an opinion you'd like to talk about it?
Yes. I'd just like to talk about the very practical sense of Scientology. Scientology is, I will just remove the religious aspect of it all
Hmm.
and discuss the business aspect of it all. As a business, Scientology is very effective and very productive.
Hmm.
They have members in all forms of life or in business, that is.
Mhm.
and they use it to their advantage. It's like a fraternity. So if you have a buddy that's in a particular movie studio, you'll get the favor for your actors who happen to be part of your clique, which is the Scientology. Tom Cruise has benefited uh, his career from such from being involved with Scientology. Uh,
Sure.
a lot of people would say, well, without Scientology, you would still be a kick-ass dude, man. But it doesn't see it that way.
Well, and we do have to take into account there's a quite different Tom Cruise's experience with Scientology is quite different than the layman, because Tom Cruise doesn't have to pay them anything; they pay him, right? Because he's
Well,
basically
yeah,
a
yeah.
walking commercial. Whereas the average person comes in, you have to pay a certain amount of money. Of course, it's not that big in the beginning, but if you want those greater secrets, if you want that, you want your soul to be saved, you need to pay this much money. Oh, well, there's more secrets coming. Pay this much. Oh, you need more. Here's more, 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 more. And in the end, you're talking thousands of dollars just to take some kind of audit class that they do. And it's ridiculous. This is straight up fraud. Straight up fraud. And they're not only are they brainwashing people, breaking people, they're stealing from people. They do thuggish tactics. They intimidate. There's even been accusations of murder that is around Scientology. Of course, I don't know if that's been proven, but they're certainly thuggish. And if you say the wrong thing and you make too much noise, they will send people to beat you down. Right? This is Scientology. It is pure evil, and it is playing upon people's sensibility of religion. And it is a conspiracy because it is a conspiracy to hijack a person's faith for monetary gain, right? This is why I
You just described every religion on the planet.
I did. But I also understand that a lot of religions will also they will restrain themselves, dude. They're trying to be part of your life in a long run. This is kind of like a thing with, when we look at, let me step away from the religion and just get into practical politics for a second. When we look at the success America has had, or Canada, or Britain, or Japan, or Korea, et cetera, et cetera, we look at the successes that they're having in the modern age. And then we go look below our southern border and say, let's say just take Mexico, right? There's a lot more conversation to be had in Central and South America, but let's just stick with Mexico, all right? They're sitting on the border with America, the most profitable, powerful country on the planet, whether you like it or not, that is what it is. They have a coast on the Atlantic and the Pacific. They're full of resources, lots of oil, lots of things in that country, and yet they're dirt poor with nothing but corruption. And you're like, how can this be? How could Mexico be such a failed state when they're sitting right next to America and even above them, Canada, which is we understand there's nonsense going on with Trudeau and stuff now, but Canada is a successful state, right? Well, how could this be? How could possibly Mexico be such a failure? Well, the reason is corruption. Now you say, well, we have corruption too. Yes, we do, but we have different kind of corruption. Now, some people may make an argument that there's IQ involved and stuff like that, but I don't know. I don't need to go that down that route. You can make that decision yourself. But this is what I will say is happening in Mexico and many other places on the planet. You have people who are very short-sighted in their corruption. They see that they want their money right now, right now. And this, of course, destroys everything. Whereas the corruption in, say, America, these guys understand that, hey, I want to make my money, but I understand that the people need money too. Because the more money the people have, the more I can take off the top, the more I can skim, right? And therefore, their corruption is long term corruption. And that is why you see America being so successful, because they know that they must make the people successful in order for them to be wealthy, rich, and powerful. Right, but the Mexicans and many other governments on the planet, they don't do that. It's all about the right now, the instant gratification, and their corruption constantly destroys everything they try to build because they don't have the brains to see the long picture. Right, and Scientology is that same kind of crap, in my opinion, where the Catholic Church is the more clever, the smarter long-term con, because they understand that if they take just 10%, support you, put a lot of the money toward actually trying to make be a part of your community, help you out, in the end they're going to be continually sustainable and profitable, right? And this is the difference between America, a la Catholic Church, and Scientology, a la Mexico.
Wow.
Yeah, well, it is what it is, right?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, it's interesting that you make the distinction. There's two countries, one to the north of the United States and one to the south of the United States. They both have the equal opportunity
Hmm.
and to make deals with the United States to be a
That's right.
success. And we are quite literally fortunate and lucky to be beside the biggest um, animal on the planet.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's my
And
point. They're sitting right next to America. They even have modern things that came in through Clinton, or should I say, Bill Clinton gets the credit, but Hillary Clinton's the one that made it happen. NAFTA. They have NAFTA to help them out too, and they still can't compete. And it's because of the corruption, because that short-term thinking, that low IQ thinking that is coming out of their politicians and their leadership. They can't make the long-term con. They can't see that the profit is in the long term, not the short term. Now, a lot of us would be sitting here saying, "Well, why don't we just have no corruption?" I agree. What kind of world do you live in? Because that's not going to happen. So for me, if I have no choice but to have corruption, I'd rather have a much smarter corruption because that corruption understands that I have to be part of the profit, right? And this is
yes,
where the successful countries in the world, this is where you see they're successful. They're corrupt. You think Germany's not corrupt? You think Japan's not corrupt? Goodness gracious, of course they are. But they understand that I must have money in my pocket. I must make a living. And therefore, they are going to make a lot more on the back end. And they're also going to have a lot more influence. Because look at Japan, right? Japan is militaristically are nothing. They are nothing, right? But yet they are the number three, arguable number two economy on the planet. The economic power that Japan has is unprecedented. Unprecedented for such a little teeny country like that. But they have it. You know why? Because their corrupted leadership is smart. And they understand that if they make everyone in Japan middle class, the amount of money, the amount of power, the amount of access that they get worldwide is far superior to the money that they can take today, right? And this is simply looking at things logistically and realistically. Corruption exists. I want corruption that is going to function for a long term period because in that way it benefits me. And people like Mexico and Brazil and Argentina and Venezuela, Africa, India. I mean, India is like probably one of the most corrupt places on the planet, guys. You just probably don't know that because you don't get a lot of information from India. But these corrupt societies fail miserably because they don't have the long-term view. And this is Mexico is a perfect example of it. It's sitting right there. They should be way rich, dude. They should be mega rich and powerful, dude. How in the world is Mexico such a failed state? They are literally third world in some of their areas. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense, man. But it is. And it's really because the corruption of their politicians is right now. It's self gratification at the moment. And they simply don't have a leadership that's smart enough to have a better level of corruption.
well, yeah, that's interesting that you say this. The one thing that I take away from this particular part of the show is that while every country tries to be socialist, I'm quite being serious here.
Hmm.
Every country is trying to be socialist. There's only a few countries that actually rejected it and went capitalist, but there's a few elements within that country that are still socialist, meaning, yeah, doctors, uh, fire, police, all that stuff that works on the socialist system. No problem.
Hmm.
Everybody's happy. A little bit of it does work, and it keeps society safe, healthy. The one thing that really surprised me is that Japan has what you said. Japan has such a strong middle class system.
It's
That
pretty
is
much
the
100%.
backbone.
Yeah.
That is the backbone of a productive society.
Absolutely.
If
Yeah.
you if you support and maintain a very strong, a very healthy middle class system, your economics will will skyrocket to the stratosphere, to new heights. People will be
Hmm.
spending, people will be
Yeah,
buying,
yeah.
people will be making things.
Oh, yeah.
And and in terms of uh, being an influence to the rest of the world, you'll be you'll be at the top.
Well,
You'll
sure.
be an
Yeah.
apex society.
Yeah, and if you couple that with a highly educated society, what you also get is very low crime rates that we have here in Japan. That's right. I mean, IQ goes. And no, I understand that intelligence, genius, is more of an application of IQ compared to brain chemistry. I get this. I know IQ isn't everything, but it is at least a quantifier, right? And when you have a highly educated, and understand IQ is just simply about how well you are educated and how well you can retain and resuscitate it, right? Bring it back out, right? And Japan having a very high IQ and a very high educated society, there's hardly any crime here at all, right?
Well,
And yet they're very socialistic as well.
the interesting thing about crime in society is that you will find crime most happens in areas of a neighborhood where there's a great difference between the haves and the have-nots.
Hmm.
It only happens in those communities.
Well, it has a lot to do with
And
education, though, George. It's about education,
it,
really.
no, education is one thing, but where you have a community or a part of the land where there's a collection of haves and have-nots within
Mhm.
arm distance, if you want to call it that.
Sure.
That's where crime is most persistent.
Well, sure.
But it's less where there's the haves and the haves, or the nots and the nots.
Well, socialism itself creates this extreme dichotomy between the have and the have-nots, actually, more
That's
so than
right. Right.
conservatism. But of course, the thing with socialism, it in itself is a low IQ corruption. It really is. Have you ever read Marx? I suggest you all go read Karl Marx, and what you'll see is this angry little loser boy pervert smiling back at you. Go read Karl Marx. People, oh, he's a genius. No, he isn't. Go read it and you'll see exactly what Karl Marx is. And this is the problem: people don't read stuff. People don't research. You go do a little bit of research into Karl Marx, you'll see that he was an absolute loser. He never paid for nothing. He was kept by his benefactor, probably his homosexual lover, but I don't care about that. But he was kept his whole life. He was a spoiled little rich boy, not a rich boy, just a kept boy that had all kind of opinions, and he was very perverted and very messed up in his head. But yet people follow this absolute moron. Go read Karl Marx, and you'll see how low IQ he actually is. Right, but yet
I read one.
socialism is built upon this nonsense.
I read one someplace. I think it was on Twitter. Karl Marx, the greatest troll ever.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. I'd agree. He's just smart enough to get himself in trouble. And if you go and like I said, the problem is people don't read stuff, man. Even when they're having a conversation about something, they don't bother to actually research the point. Like I'm sitting here talking about Scientology. I'm not giving you my opinion because of what I've heard from other people. I have researched Scientology deeply to understand exactly what this nonsense is. I understand exactly how ugly this thing is. And I can sit in here and tell you that, but that doesn't mean anything. You need to go find out for yourself. But Karl Marx, particularly, I mention it because it's a current major issue in the world today. Whether you call it Marxism, socialism, communism, fascism, I don't care what you call it, it's all the same low IQ corruption. It's nonsense. And it does nothing but cause harm, right? And this is all kind of coming out of this religious conversation because don't think I've gone on a tangent. I haven't gone on a tangent at all because this is religion. You think socialism is not a religion? You think fascism is not a religion? It most certainly is. They're all religion.
Well,
This
a
IJW
religion
identity politics is absolute religion.
a religion is doing the same thing over and over and over religiously,
Yes.
and no pun
Well,
intended.
we know what it is, but I'm just saying that these conversations that have branched off here into political governments and political ideals are not straying away from the conversation whatsoever. They are all part of the same idea. The conspiracy of religion, meaning the corruption of religion for whatever gain. Usually, it's for power or financial gain. But that is the conspiracy of religion. Religion itself, faith and belief, is not a conspiracy theory. It is not an evil thing. It's a good thing. Why shouldn't you have faith? Even if we go back to the oldest stories we have, which come out of Ireland and Mesopotamia, right? Or even if you bring into the Egyptian conversation, which was later, but still. When you look at those gods, those so-called gods, Osiris, Adad, Nuada, Lu, the Morrigan, whatever, all of those gods, they had a god themselves. This is an interesting thing when you look deep into those so-called religious histories, because those gods, they had a god. They had one god, actually, which is quite interesting, and they called him the creator of all, quite universally, the singular God, the creator of all. So how is it that your gods that eventually became the Greek gods, which eventually became the gods of the at least the presentation of the Torah, and the gods of the Jews, which of course eventually became the God of the Christian religion, when they're all coming out of these ancient stories, but yet they believed in a creator of all. They had their own God in and of itself. This tells you that faith in and of itself has value. And if you go and you look at this, if the deeper you study science, this is a hobby of mine. I love science. I love physics, especially plasma sciences. I think it's amazing. But the deeper you look into science, the more you realize that create intelligent design is almost inevitable, right? And having faith in something greater than yourself, having faith in something beyond that had its hand in your creation and possibly a hand in your future, this is not a bad thing. This is a good thing, actually. It's the problem when the corrupt take it over for financial gains or for the purposes of power, like in an extreme here with Scientology. This is the problem. The faith is not a problem. The religion is, I think, personally.
Well, certainly is a very strong point of view. The one thing that's a lot of people consider faith is a way of life. It's a rules and regulations,
Sure.
not informal rules and regulations apart from society's hard and fast laws and bylaws that we would have.
Hmm.
Is that you have the will to actually govern yourself and govern the people, your peers, your siblings, uh, parents to their children. That there's a certain amount of do and do nots.
Hmm.
It treats everyone as if you would be wanting to be treated yourself.
Yeah, sure.
It's
That's
just
just
simple things
kindness. Yeah.
to survive within society,
Hmm.
to make yourself at least safe, or make society safe around you, to
Yeah.
have a peaceful existence.
Yeah, but it also
And
comes into this
and
simple aspect of this, George. You regiment your body because you want to be healthy. You regiment your mind because you want to be more successful, more uh, involved in the modern world. But why should you not also regiment your spirituality? Now, some people might want to simply call that emotion. That's fine. But you must regiment it. We all can understand and agree that you are mind, body, and spirit. This is what makes you. So why should you not regiment it all? Now, someone here says is making some interesting comments. Pope Dexter says, "I'm going to find biasology." Awesome. I think it'll make a lot of money. Amen. Amen to you too, Howl Comics. Of course, that is coming from Amen Ra, just so you know. Evanism is a suspect. Yeah, I don't know. We should consider Evanism. It's got a good name to it. I kind of like it. It rolls off the tongue. And then Roger actually asked a serious question: where does Kabbalah fit into this? Now, if we wanted to get into Kabbalah, which could be a good conversation, that's going to be a long show. And that's going to take a bunch of preparation on my part, which I wouldn't mind doing if you guys are interested. Kabbalah is deep and it's old. I mean, truly ancient, right? And Kabbalah is really talking more about how to access your spiritual energy, and it's a lot far less about politics. Now, some people have used Kabbalah over the millennia for political gain and some truly evil stuff. But Kabbalah itself is more about mystical magic. It's an interesting conversation, though. We could have that. Would you be interested in talking about Kabbalah, George?
I have no understanding of it at all, other than Madonna believes in it,
I've read a
and
bunch of books on it.
I haven't.
Yeah.
I heard of it. Um, I tried to read something about it, and I fell asleep by the time I hit the first sentence.
I see. Well, just as a kind of a overview, Kabbalah is really coming out of the old sects and cults of Inanna, which of course you guys would recognize more as being Ishtar or Isis or Venus or Aphrodite. Right, coming out of these cults, and it grew up over time and became something very sophisticated, which is part of the Jewish religion. Well, kind of part of the Jewish religion. Now, this is aside from the Church of Horus or the cult of Horus, and of course, aside from the cult of Mystara, which would be the Roman take on the Egyptian Horus cult. But they're quite separate. They're not necessarily connected at all. And there's also a lot of other aspects of the cults of Athena and Apollo, which come into it and applying as well, which is odd, but that's a whole nother side conversation, actually. But Kabbalah is interesting and it's super old. And I think most of the people would recognize Kabbalah better, actually, if I did it from the Indian point of view, talking about chakra. If we talked about the chakras and the different chakras in the body and how you have to balance all this and yada, 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 I think modern people would recognize very quickly what that is because they've seen it used, they've seen its imagery. Kabbalah is the same thing, actually. It really is. Yeah, maybe it would be better to kind of present uh, the um, the chakra beliefs of the Hindi people and the various other Indian religions would be probably easier to way to see it than going from the ancient Mesopotamian religion that is Kabbalism. Anyway, oof, that was a long one, George. That was interesting though. Just two of us too. We did a pretty good job, I think. What do you think?
Yeah, we gave him the 1-2 punch, and
We
we came
did.
and we dropped kicked him just for the heck of it.
Yeah, right. But Anyway, guys, I had fun. Hope you guys did too. We had a good number of people in here joining us. We do appreciate it, man. We love you guys coming along and being part of our conversation. And keep in mind that we'd love to have you come up here. If you guys have any kind of conspiracy theory you want to talk about, or you want to do any of the things we do in any of the Fan Speak shows, I'd love to have you come up here, guys. We really would. We all know the gold built the pyramids. I agree. And if you guys want to have a conversation someday during the week, talking about Stargate or SG1 in particular, or Atlantis or whatever, or Universe or whatever, I'd love it because I love that. I've seen every episode of the Stargate. I love Stargate. Wonderful idea. Matter of fact, I kind of wish they would do a new show of it here and bring it back in maybe a more gritty, serious way. Not a reboot, just a continuation. And Evan just got here. Well, we're talking about Evanism. You certainly can't have just got here. You have been omnipresent ever since, sir. But we do love you guys coming in. And if you want to be part of that, just hit those links up and contact me on my Twitter, man. Just say, Chester, I want to be on the show. I want to talk about this. Dude, we'd love to have you. We don't care what you want to talk about. We don't care. It could be the craziest conspiracy theory of all time. That's cool by me, man. We just want to have a chit chat and have some fun and pontificate. And you never know. During our pontifications, maybe something actually interest comes out. Maybe we actually learn something from each other. Who knows, right? And we're just having a good, fun time, and we love you guys being part of that. Nevertheless, do keep in mind that tomorrow our week starts. I guess you could look at this as being in the beginning of the week, I guess. But we do have our comics news today, which is tomorrow at 9 p.m., though, Eastern Standard Time. We do it an hour later on Monday to try to accommodate the people in California a little bit. And it seems to be working, so we're going to keep doing that. Definitely come back and join us for that. And of course, during our week, we do have our, of course, Drawn and Quartered Fan Edition, which we love, as well as our Fan Speak, etc., etc. But awesome, guys. You got any closing statements to make to the folks there, George, before we head out?
Yeah, yes, I do. Yes, I do.
All right.
Chester, do you have the superpower of making me a wrench?
I do. I didn't know you weren't Win. Go ahead and just type something in the chat, and I'll make your a moderator.
Okay.
Just type in the chat there.
Well, I'm gonna paste the link.
Well, just go ahead and type in the chat, and I'll make you a moderator. Then you can do whatever you want.
Okay,
That's the
there.
quickest way.
I typed. I pasted a link in the chat.
Uh-huh.
This, ladies and gentlemen, is the actual documentary, "The Lost Tomb of Jesus." I
There you go.
found it on YouTube. It was released just about a year ago. And I'm flabbergasted. This is it. This is what I was talking about.
Mhm.
The statistic analysis is in this video. The location is in this video. Everything that I talked about, and then some. You can see it for yourself. Um, it is fascinating.
Mhm.
Of course, take it with a grain of salt because it doesn't definitively prove it, but it does give you a scientific overall view of it.
Yeah. Oh, cool. Excellent, guys. Also, keep in mind that if any of you guys have any kind of comments or things you would like us to talk about, even if maybe you're not willing to come up here yourself and talk, but you do have suggestions for this show or any other show, once again, just hit up my Twitter down below and give me that suggestion. I'd be happy to check it out. Now, we do have the comments down below, and I try to check them from time to time, but I'm not really great about that, it seems. But I do try to keep somewhat of an eye on them. But it's a lot better just to contact me through Twitter. That link is down below. And yeah, if you got a great idea, we'd love to talk about it. So thank you guys, and we will see you tomorrow, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thank you guys very much. I haven't said anything of particularly wisdom, but namaste nevertheless. Later.
Bye bye.